right, welcome. We're so overjoyed to be with you to talk about a topic near and dear to our heart, which is thriving in the Texas A&M college admissions process. A couple of housekeeping details. Number one, we are recording this webinar and we will be sharing it tomorrow in a follow-up email along with our guide to applying to A&M and a couple of other resources. Number two, many of you are veterans of all things Zoom. We want to answer your questions as best as we can. Some of the questions end up being super personalized, and we probably can't answer them without spending some time with a student or a parent. But if you do have questions, please use the QA so that we can answer your questions. And we love answering questions. So as best as we can, we'll answer those questions. And I think that's it. So let's dive in. We are really lucky this webinar to have Julie and Delora on our team join us. I don't know that I'll put either one of them on the spot to ask them exactly how many students they work with that are on campus at Aggie Land right now. But in any given year, a third to 40% of the students we work with at College Matchpoint apply to Texas A&M University. Delora wrote the first guide on applying to Texas A&M University, and Julie Ritchie reviewed it and knows back and forth. So they're really going to spend the majority of this webinar talking with us about their experience and how that applies to how students can thrive in this process. Okay. Just a little bit about College Matchpoint. Lisa and I are both Aggies. I wouldn't necessarily say we are hardcore Aggies, but we are Aggies, and we love students who find A&M as a great fit. The majority of students that we've worked with at who are at Aggie Land aren't auto-admit students, and many of them apply to competitive majors like business and engineering. I feel compelled as an Aggie to brag on it. It's just an incredible school with so many wonderful traditions. I won't sing any of the yells that the yell leaders lead us in. It is the second largest university in terms of student enrollment in the United States. It always shocks people that it's the #1 school in the United States that CEOs of Fortune 500 companies attended. It's the first among public universities in terms of rankings for a superior education at an affordable cost. And then God bless the Aggies and their fundraising abilities. It was the first college in the United States to surpass $1 billion in research grants. A couple of things about this year's results. In terms of admissions, we've been doing this webinar 3 years, and 3 years in a row, the first bullet is true. Last year was the largest number of applications that Texas A&M University received in its history, an increase over the prior year, which was an increase over the prior year. And the growth is in out-of-state applicants. The nation is waking up to the fact that for the right student, who's interested in strong majors, traditions, the kind of approach that A&M has to higher education, it's just a great option. 53% of the incoming class was in that top 10% that A&M auto admits. If you look across their class, it's disproportionately students who were in the top 35% of their class. And I know everyone will say, hey, my high school doesn't rank, or they don't rank at 35th. Most students can get a sense, GPA, where they're at in terms of the bell curve of their class. The competitive majors and or the students who weren't top 10% go through what's called the holistic review, and Julie and Delora will unpack that in great detail, but that was about half of the incoming class. Texas A&M, unlike its rival right up the road, is still test optional. That being said, last year, 66% of the incoming class submitted test scores. Okay, so it is a school that on the one hand provides you an option to goes test optional, and on the other hand, is really looking at rigor, both in terms of your transcript and if you have a strong test score in terms of your test score. And then finally, A&M has really been a trailblazer in providing alternative pathways. 16% of their incoming freshman class goes through one of these pathways. We won't play acronym bingo and explain to you team versus TEAB or gateway. Suffice to say, A&M really wants people to be part of the A&M community. And if it's not necessarily on the College Station campus in freshman year, they're going to do everything they can to make sure you are part of their community. I'm going to turn it over to Delara and Julie now. They're going to go through a whole series of items. I'd remind you, if you have questions, please share them in the Q&A box and we'll dive in. But here we go.
All right, thanks, Bob. So let's talk about the review process. A&M really reviews people in two ways, applicants. So either you're an automatic admit, as Bob was saying, so if you're in the top 10%, you are automatically admitted to the university, not necessarily to a specific major, but to the university. Those students who are auto-admitted are required to send an official high school transcript confirming their top 10% ranking. So that's something that is required to complete that application. But as Bob was saying, the majority of students we work with are actually not in the top % of their high school classes. So let's talk about what that looks like. So what is a holistic read? For the majority of students applying to A&M, A&M really looks at every aspect of their application, as this graphic describes. As you can see, the transcript is the biggest part of this graphic, and that means that all a student's high school courses taken and grades earned, and the rigor of that coursework. So meaning when you had a chance to take an AP course or an honors course, did you take it? That is important in how they look at your transcript. So for younger students on this webinar, what this really means is taking the most rigorous courses you can handle, particularly in the courses that are most related to your strengths and interests, and aiming for the highest grades you can is really important because your GPA and the rigor of that coursework is going to be one of the most important pieces of data that A&M looks at when reviewing your application if you're not in the top 10%. Test scores are something they definitely will look at if they're submitted. Like Bob was saying, they're still test optional at this point. And certainly if you're aiming for one of the competitive majors that Delara will talk about later, but like business and engineering, high test scores are something that can really add to your application. A&M encourages all students, though, to submit scores if you have them, and they emphasize that they'll only use scores to benefit you, not penalize you. So it may be to your advantage to send scores, but that's a case-by-case basis. Students' extracurricular activities listed in the application and on the resume are really important, including any community service, leadership, employment, summer activities, and any opportunities, challenges, or hardships. Those would be things that you'd want to talk about in your essays. So resume and essays are really important. We do recommend that students show fit to their first choice major, just like at UT, through classes and activities, which will help in this holistic review process. At A&M, when you are filling out the application on a common application, which is where most people fill out, and also on Apply Texas, if you choose that application, there is a question about how have you interacted with A&M. So it does make sense to demonstrate interest. So visiting the campus or doing a virtual visit, anything, talking with an admissions officer, either through email or by phone. It's really good to be able to check some of those boxes when you're filling out the application so you can show your interest in A&M. All right, next slide, Bob. Thank you. So in terms of admissions decisions, A&M offers a rolling admissions, but with a twist. So applicants who are in the top 10% of their high school class will get their admission decision very quickly, like in a few weeks, once they get your official transcript and they can confirm your rank. Applicants who apply to the College of Engineering have an opportunity for an early action deadline of October 15th. And if you have all your documents and transcript and all your information in by October 15th, you will receive your admission decision by mid-December. But if you're outside the top 10%, your admissions decision is a little bit different, the timeline. So you are accepted into majors on a rolling basis, but you may not hear, even if you submit your application very early, which we do recommend. The common application opens on August 1st. And while many of the students we work with want to submit on that day, that's not actually something we recommend, because we want to make sure you are submitting a quality application that you've had a chance to review and proofread. And if you submit it on that day, also there may be some glitches the first few days an application is open. So we definitely encourage you to submit by the end of August, for sure, is a good timeline to shoot for, but you don't need to do it that first day or even that first week. Really, you can't take the application back once you've sent it in. So we really encourage you to take your time with it and make sure to have people review it. So everything looks good. But in terms of decision process, it's important to understand that even when you submit your application in August, you may not hear back until between January 1st and late March. But we still encourage you to get your applications in so that you can be placed into a major as they're filling in over the months. Okay, testing. As Bob was mentioning, A&M is still test optional, which means they don't require you to submit scores. So whether to submit or not depends on where your scores fall compared to the middle 50% of accepted applicants, and really the major you're choosing. So they really encourage you to have scores, to send scores if you have them, like I said. They really work hard not to disadvantage you. When you are submitting your scores, you need to submit them directly from the agency. So if you have taken the SAT and that's the score you're sending, you need to send it from the College Board. If you've taken the ACT, you need to send it from the ACT. And one very, very important thing that I want everyone to remember is you need to make sure to request that your scores be sent well in advance of the deadline or of when you want them to be there, because it could take several weeks for scores to get there. And a lot of students miss, they think that it will be immediate when they click, send scores, but it's not. So make sure if you're done testing now and you're happy with your scores and you're going to send them, you can send them now. You don't have to wait until you've submitted your application. So that's just one thing to think about. Make sure to think ahead.
Julie, when you work with a student and she's considering whether or not to go test optional or submit test scores, what are the aspects or considerations that you encourage her to consider when she's making that important choice?
Yeah, great question. So what I encourage a student to do is look at where her score falls within that middle 50%. So if the scores are right in the middle of that middle 50%, we definitely suggest submitting them. If they're kind of below the, even in that middle 50% band, at the lower range, we might say, okay, well, hold on. Where's your GPA? Is your GPA above, the middle range? That's something to take into consideration. So it's sort of a case-by-case basis. But as a general rule, I'd say if your test scores are within that middle 50% range, I would go ahead and send them.
And Julie, have you seen with the students that you've worked with any importance that A&M places on the component test scores when a student submits her test scores?
So I recently had a conversation with an admissions officer about this, and they said that they do not look at the specific components. They really look at the total score, which is a difference from UT.
And you've mentioned a question here or a comment here around the middle 50% for GPA and SAT. A comment I would make to everyone on the webinar is that the great news about academic criteria is that colleges publish a data set called the Common Data Set. There are a handful of parents who completely nerd out on this. Think tax code. It's that level of minutia. And so every year, A&M and all other schools, or most other schools, publish the GPA range and the SAT or ACT range for their school. When we work with students, we really take their highest test score and in some cases their highest super score for the schools that do super score. And once they're sort of done with testing, we'll go through score by score, school by school, and look at that 50% range. But for the parents and students who are on this Zoom, what I encourage you to think of is a bell curve. And we generally talk with students when we help them make a choice, and it's ultimately the student's choice because they did the work for test prep. Around that middle, or from 50% higher. And we've oftentimes found that for students who are focusing on competitive majors, they're even looking at the top quartile of the test score distribution. Delara, I know we've had a lot of questions on this. Does that sort of handle from your experience how you've worked with students on considering whether or not to go test optional or submitting test scores?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think, the thing to consider, especially with the most competitive majors like engineering, business, architecture, is always keeping in mind to shoot for the higher end of that bell curve. So, if, for example, within A&M's range, you want to be on the higher end of that middle 50% range than on the lower end. That's really kind of what we recommend to students.
Great. We're going to turn our attention now to the next section. We're really excited to see all these questions, and we're doing everything we can to answer those questions. So let's dive in, if we could, Delara, to majors at Texas A&M University.
All right, my pleasure. Thank you, Bob. So A&M is a major focused school. That's how they conduct their admissions review. They don't really recommend students apply to Texas A&M undecided. It isn't really an option within the application itself, and A&M doesn't really provide resources for undecided students. So it's really recommended that students select a first choice major, and they're also able to designate a second choice major within their application. I really recommend students take some time to review the majors that are available at Texas A&M. When I last counted, there were approximately 140 different majors, which is a staggering number of options. And there are some really cool ones that kind of fly under the radar that I think would make amazing options for students beyond, the top 5 that we're about to discuss. Now, I know that, I said that Texas A&M is major focused. You really have to apply to a particular major there in your application. But unlike UT, A&M does make it significantly easier to switch majors once you're already enrolled at the university. So, if you apply to a major in communications and decide it's not for you, it's much easier, and there's significantly more support at the university to change things around if that's kind of the path that you want to take. So Texas A&M is what we call an extra large university. There are approximately 50,000 undergraduates who call Texas A&M their home. And I want to break down the approximate sizes of the most popular academic colleges at Texas A&M. By colleges, I mean the kind of academic divisions that they divide their majors into. Engineering is the largest college at Texas A&M. There are approximately 20,000 engineering students at Texas A&M across all of the different, I think there are about 20 different engineering majors on the campus. So about a third of the student body is an engineer. The next largest would be business. There are probably between 6,000 and 8,000 business students at Texas A&M, which when you compare to the size of the engineering college, that's actually quite small. Business is a pretty space limited program at Texas A&M. And, I say 8,000, I'm referring to the entire university's capacity for business. So that's, really about 2,000 to 1,500 freshmen that they admit for business at a given time. The next largest, which is, slightly smaller than business, that would be their agriculture and their biological sciences majors. These are the colleges that are home to majors like agricultural science, animal science, poultry science, agribusiness, biochem, and majors like that. All right, so let's focus a little bit on that most popular program at A&M, engineering. As I mentioned before, 1/3 of the student body at A&M is an engineering student. And what's kind of unique about A&M's admissions process with engineering is that you are admitted to the general engineering program in your first year, and this includes computer science. So even CS students are admitted to this first year engineering program, general engineering, rather than that particular specialty that you are interested in. So for example, at UT, you're actually able to apply straight into the major of aerospace or mechanical or electrical engineering. That's not the case as a first-time applicant to Texas A&M. What you end up doing is you spend your first year at A&M going through an engineering core curriculum, and then you apply for your top, I think it's 3 majors within engineering. You go through an application review process called the entry to a major process. And then that's kind of how you end up getting into the engineering specialty of your choice. As Julie mentioned earlier, it's important to apply to A&M as soon as you can. Engineering majors, including computer science, are the only exception to that rule. Engineering has an early action deadline of October 15th. So that's really the deadline we encourage our engineering students to shoot for. Now you can apply earlier. You don't have to wait until October 15th, but they don't begin reviewing engineering applicants until after that date. So there isn't a benefit to applying early other than getting the application out of your hair. In a minute, Julie is going to talk more closely about the essays required for applying to Texas A&M. But just as a preview, the engineering program is the only program that requires an engineering related essay where applicants are required to state why they're interested in the subject, what motivates them in engineering, what are they curious about, and how they think an A&M's program in engineering can support their goals. It's really important to spend some time really being thoughtful as you write this essay. And if I could give one piece of advice on what not to do, please don't start your essay writing about, your interest in engineering being started when you were a little kid because you loved Legos. That at this point, I think is pretty cliche. We've heard from Texas A&M admissions representatives that they're kind of tired of that essay construction. So really think deeply about what sparked your interest in engineering. How have you followed that interest over time and what your goals are outside of, in and outside of college. All right, so there are a few majors at A&M that are really space limited. They're high demand and they're small programs. And so if you're interested in these programs, we recommend applying as early as you can because spaces really fill up. This is especially true for the Mays School of Business. If anyone on this webinar is interested in applying to Mays, I recommend getting organized and making sure you're able to get that application out the door pretty soon after the application opens. Mays is a pretty small program and there are limited seats for new students. So, if the majors within Mays include subjects like accounting, finance, management, marketing. And so even if you're in the top 10%, I recommend getting that application in as soon as you're able to compile a polished and complete application. The College of Nursing is also a limited space major, but it's also kind of a tricky major at A&M. As a first-year applicant, you aren't able to apply to nursing as your first choice major. It's just not an option. Instead, you apply to a different major of your choice, probably something in the health-related fields. And then once you finish your first 2 years at A&M, you apply for their BSN in nursing program. It's almost like filling out an entire transfer application and applying to that nursing program. It's also quite small. They only admit between 20 to 40 students each year. And then the other really small program at A&M to keep in mind is their architecture program. It's highly competitive. It's very limited in size because it's an extremely resource intensive major. It requires a lot of time in the studio, a lot of hands-on work. So keep this information in mind as you plan your application timeline. So while there are, many popular majors at A&M, many of them are space limited. There are also several really interesting majors that I think are just hidden gems that, students really don't notice because they flock to the most popular majors. I want to talk through some of my favorites here. The first is visualization. This is kind of a crown jewel among the A&M majors, I would say. It's kind of an interdisciplinary major that's really a mix between art, graphic design, game design, animation. Really, students can choose how they want to specialize in visualization. And I think something that people don't know about the visualization major is that it is a heavy source of recruitment from Pixar studios. Pixar has a robust showing of Aggie alumni among their ranks. And students who graduate from the visualization major tend to do really well for themselves on the job market. It's a small major, but it's a good one. And first-year applicants don't need a portfolio to apply to visualization, which is kind of nice. There's also meteorology. Texas A&M is home to one of the best meteorology programs in the country. It's another small major, but it's fabulous. I've never worked with a student, an aspiring meteorology major, but I hope to one day. And a few other majors that I want to draw to your attention that aren't on this slide include dance science, entomology, which is the study of bugs, and turfgrass science. So, A&M comes with so many options. I really recommend if you have your eye on being an A&M student to really do some research. They have a fabulous resource on their Career Center website that lists out all of their majors, tells you more about them, and shares the skills that you might be able to accumulate within those majors and the jobs that they could lead into. All right, so since we last hosted this webinar, A&M has announced several new majors that they're going to be implementing. Building off of their roots as a space grant university, A&M is launching a new space engineering major that's starting in the fall of 2025. I find this thrilling. This program, so unlike aerospace engineering, which is another fabulous major at A&M, that kind of explores, the engineering involved in getting into space. Space engineering is focused on, the engineering behind being in space, building habitats and structures in space and on planets and things like that. I think it's a really cool and innovative new program. Financial planning in the Mays School of Business used to just be a minor. That's going to be transformed into a full bachelor's degree. International Affairs is now becoming an undergraduate major. It was formerly a master's program. And after 10 years in the dark, A&M is relaunching their journalism program, which disbanded in 2004. That's going to be in the College of Arts and Sciences. I'm going to turn it over now to Julie, who's going to take us through the essays involved in the A&M application.
All right. Thanks,
Julie, I know
Laura.
you've been manning the Q&A boxes. Delora has talked through majors. Are there any questions that you think would be helpful to answer to the webinar as a whole?
Sure. So while I'm about to talk about essays, there's a question about the additional information essay section of the Common App and whether that's a good place to expand on activities or if the resume is better. So what I was typing, but I'll just say it to the whole group, is the additional information essay can be a useful tool if there's a specific activity that you didn't already write about in one of your essays. Like A&M has a specific activity essay. So if you didn't write about it there, but it's something where, it was very important to you, or you learned something, or it was a challenge or an obstacle or whatever, and you wanted to write about it, yeah, you totally could. And then that would be a better place than the resume, which is more bullet points. So I think it really depends on your situation and what you're hoping to accomplish, like what you're trying to tell about yourself, and which would be the better platform, bullets or more in-depth essay format. So it really depends. So I hope I answered that.
Speaking of essays, do you want to dive in and talk through this important aspect of what you shared in terms of the A&M review, and that is essays?
Absolutely. So students will be required to submit 3 essays to A&M. The personal statement, which is that statement that the personal essay that they're going to send to all their schools. And then two other short answer essays. And these are really where they're going to tell their story about who they are and information beyond what they're sharing in their transcript and their activity list and their resume and their test scores. So this is a really great opportunity. So let's talk about the personal statement first. I really encourage students to use their Common App essay for this, even though on their website, A&M has their own prompt, which is tell us your story, what unique opportunities or challenges have you experienced throughout your high school career that have shaped who you are today, right? This is a very broad prompt, and any of the Common App prompts, if you're already writing that, and most students are, can be used. So I would just use that same essay. When you're thinking about the role of the personal statement and what it plays in your college application process, I always like to explain to students how it's going to be used. So imagine you are an admissions officer and you have a whole student's file up on your computer, right? So you're looking at their transcript, so you see what kind of student they are. You're looking at their resume, their test scores, like all that information. And then they're going to get to the personal statement. So by the time they get there, they already know a lot about your accomplishments, the things you've been involved in, and what kind of student you are and what kind of tester you are if you submitted those. So it's really important that you don't rehash your resume in your essay because they already know it. So that would be a wasted opportunity, right? Here's your opportunity to tell more about you and dig a little deeper and reflect on your high school experience. So I really like to help students begin brainstorming by asking how they are different now, like at the end of junior year, than they were at the beginning of freshman year. And then think about the experiences in or outside of school or in their family or in the summer that have shaped them into the person they are today. So since you won't get to do an interview with most admissions officers, definitely not at A&M, consider your essay a way to kind of share new information about yourself and your values and how you will contribute to the A&M campus. So you might not want to say that in this personal essay, obviously, since you might be sending it to other schools, but showing how the values and the qualities that you have learned and exhibited in high school will be really important. And that's what makes an effective essay. So what beyond the resume. Then there are the short answer supplements that everyone will be asked to write. So there's 250-word essays. These are so short. Most students I work with I really struggle to get them to 250 words because it's so much easier to write longer for many students. So the first essay is asking you to reflect on a life event that you feel has prepared you to be successful in college. So what they're really looking at is for you to show them that you've developed the study skills, the social skills, the community building skills, or whatever it is that will help you thrive on the A&M campus. So when students are brainstorming these essays, I really recommend that they look at the website, the A&M website, and look up the A&M core values, because A&M is, as many of you know, is a very values and tradition-driven university. So any link you can make between yourself, your own values, and the university's values is an excellent way to show how you're going to contribute to that campus and be successful while you're on it. So that's a great way to kind of start thinking about which life event you might want to choose to talk about. Okay, so the second short answer question asks about a person who has impacted you. And I caution you that it's so easy for students to start writing all about the person that impacted them. And the key here is they don't want to know a biography of the person who impacted you, because the essay really has to be about you. You are the main character here. So you want to specifically describe how this person has impacted your life and reflect on how your life has been different because of your relationship with this person. And then you want to share how what you've learned from this person is going to be something you carry forward with you onto the A&M campus. And it's always great to share specifics about what this will look like at A&M, because you really want to make it so easy for that admission officer to see why you're such a great fit for A&M. So I'm going to give you an example here. Let's say you want to talk about someone in your life who taught you the value of service to other people. And in your life, you've done a lot of community service. Well, you might want to describe how at A&M, that's going to be something that you're so passionate about that you will actively engage in for example, the Ramps Club. The Ramps Club at A&M is something called Representing A&M by Performing Service. And it's a club where students do community service. So you could mention that specifically so that A&M really understands how actively you will contribute to the school community. Okay, so those are the two that everyone has to write. Now, if you are applying as an engineering major, you also will have to write a third short answer essay. And this one is 500 words, so it's actually not as short. But it's asking you to describe your academic and career goals in engineering and share what or who has influenced you either inside or outside the classroom that contributed to these goals. So we recommend that students answer this question in a straightforward manner and use specific examples and details from all your activities and your classes, like anything that's influenced you to be interested in engineering. One happy thing to note is that if you are an engineering major and you're also applying to UT, this engineering supplement is very similar to the UT Y major question. So you could, reuse some of this or, use them for both. Just make sure that when you're, sending them in that you don't have any, you have the right school in there is what I'm saying. But that could be a helpful efficiency in your process. So
Julie,
those are the answers. Yeah.
with the personal statement and the engineering essay giving the word length, how much time do you typically spend with a student you're essay coaching on brainstorming versus just jumping in and revising and drafting?
Yeah, so it so depends on each student. So I wouldn't say there's a general rule, but for students who have no idea what they want to write about, I think the brainstorming process is so important. And that can take, sometimes like an hour meeting, sometimes even an hour and a half or 2 hour meeting to kind of generate the ideas and reflection, because it's hard. This type of writing is a little bit harder because it's asking students to reflect on things and how they feel about things and what they learned. And they haven't always thought that way. And they certainly haven't learned to write that way in school. So it's great to spend a lot of time brainstorming and making sure you have a strong topic that you're excited to write about. And the examples, like, for example, in that engineering essay, you can pull up your resume to see all the things you've done that have made you excited and given you some experience related to engineering and write about those. So making sure you have all the components ready and even have an outline, if that's helpful for you, I think is really important. So yes, spending a lot of time on the brainstorming can be very helpful.
And then before we move to the next section, Julie and Laura, I know you work with plenty of students who, when they're writing these essays, start by saying, I have nothing to write about. What advice do you have for students and parents who start with a blank piece of paper and say, I've got nothing?
Yeah, great question. So Laura, do you want to chime in?
I'll let you take it, Julie.
Okay. I have so many students who come with I have nothing. And I think actually those are the students who I like to work with the most, because just by asking questions, you realize, like, obviously no one has nothing to write about, right? Because it actually doesn't really matter what you write about, with very few exceptions. What really matters is that you show the values that are important to you and try to think about what activities you've done where you've exhibited those values, or experiences you've had, or hobbies you have, or something no one knows about. So one thing I love to do when someone says they have no idea is just to say, okay, let's imagine your life in high school, the last 3 years, as a movie. What are 3 scenes that are memorable to you, that like stand out to you, where you remember them and you think, like, you smile when you think of them? And that sometimes starts a dialogue to start thinking about, oh yeah, well, oh yeah, in freshman year, I was so scared about this and oh my gosh, I was terrified. But then in sophomore, so like just to start thinking about times where you grew. Like, I think that's the most important thing about an essay is to show your growth over time and how you've changed as a person. And it really doesn't matter what you talk about in order to show that. So for you, it could be a family trip. It could be, I've had kids write about all sorts of interesting things that, people would have thought that is like nothing big, because it doesn't have to be something big. Be something little that made a big impact on you.
So, Laura, anything to add before we move to the next topic on that? It's a blank piece of paper. I have nothing to write about.
I think, if you go through Julie's 3-scene exercise and come up with nothing, which hopefully that isn't the case. Hopefully, the students on this call have had memorable and meaningful moments in their high school careers, then I always recommend taking the tack of fit to major. What are experiences that you can write about in your A&M essays that prove your interest in your major? That's kind of what I would recommend. If we're working with a blank slate and then we comb through the well of experiences in your life and those still aren't bringing up anything, which usually isn't likely at that point, then I recommend turning towards fit to major.
Great. A&M, we talked a lot about majors. A&M has some spectacular honors programs, and we want to give you at least a little high-level understanding of those honors programs.
Yeah, so honors programs at A&M are a fabulous opportunity for students who are looking for additional engagement in the classroom and a higher level of challenge in their college career. By this, I mean students who are looking to take additional coursework, oftentimes higher level coursework than their year in college would allow for, to do a special project of some kind, like a cumulative thesis. Students who love engaging with professors, who are energized by small class discussions, and students who are invested in cultivating academic relationships with their professors. Those, I think, are the kinds of students that would be most attracted to an honors program, and who I think would be attractive candidates to Texas A&M. They're also a way, especially the University Honors Program, which is a university-wide honors program, so irrespective of major, that puts together a small community of students within each grade of the university to really kind of form an intimate academic community. That's one of the ways that you can make a massive college like Texas A&M feel a little bit more personalized and a little bit less daunting. There are several types of honors opportunities in addition to university honors. There are also departmental and major-based honors programs that have you do more specific work within your major. And if you're interested in applying to these types of programs, there are a couple ways of doing it. You can apply at the time of submitting your application. The way that works is by indicating your interest in an honors program in your application. A&M will follow up with you via email, getting you the information you need to apply. Sometimes there are additional essays. Sometimes it asks for more letters of recommendation. It really depends on the honors program you're applying to. You can also apply to an honors program once you're already on campus. You don't have to do it at the time of application. So if you want to kind of figure out what life is like at A&M before committing to something like an honors program, you can do so while you're already an enrolled student. I want to draw your attention to the Launch Honors website. This is kind of the online hub for all things honors programs at Texas A&M. It goes into lengthy detail about each of the honors programs, university honors and departmental honors, as well as the perks of enrolling in each particular program, whether it comes with honors housing, whether it comes with priority registration. So if you're someone interested in one of these kinds of programs, take a look at the Launch site. And finally, I want to talk a little bit about the Business Honors Program, because this is a little bit different than the other kinds of programs that I had mentioned. Business Honors at A&M is a hybrid program. It's both an honors program and its own academic major. And typically students who pursue the Business Honors major also pursue a secondary major in business. It's a very competitive program, very competitive. It says on here, students in the top 25% of their classroom are usually competitive. The students who end up being admitted into business honors are usually closer into the top 5% of their class. They're really looking for kind of the cream of the crop in terms of academic profile, as well as engaged students who would make excellent community members, students who have already actively contributed to their own communities and who are active and engaged participants in the classroom. Historically, this major accepts around 60 students a year. But it's a great option for students who are really looking to kind of supercharge their business degree. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the logistics of applying to Texas A&M, how to apply, when to apply, and what you do after you apply. So in terms of the timeline and the application platforms, as I mentioned, you want to get that A&M application in early, especially if you are applying to a business major. The final deadline I really recommend to my students applying to business is usually September 15th, but I really feel most comfortable getting those applications in by the end of August if you're able to complete a polished and finished application. Now, just because we've been saying get those applications in early does not mean that you should turn in a sloppy application. It's always better to take your time with reason, filling out your application, reviewing your application, proofreading your whole application, than it is to get it in early. There are two primary application platforms. The Apply Texas application, that is the application platform that goes to entirely schools in Texas. So all of the public universities and some of the private universities in Texas. There's also the Common application. It doesn't matter which application platform you use. I find the Common application to be a little bit more user-friendly. But if you're only applying to universities in Texas, Apply Texas might make more sense for you. And I want to draw special attention to what you should do after you submit your Texas A&M application. Once you submit your application, usually within 3 to 5 business days, you get access to your applicant information system, your AIS, also known as your Howdy portal. This is the web interface that A&M is going to be using to communicate with applicants. It's where they inform you that they've received all your application materials. It's where they tell you that you might be missing a particular application material, like they haven't received your test scores yet. It's also going to be where they inform you of your application decision. A few years ago, we learned from A&M that Texas A&M doesn't do demonstrated interest in the traditional way because it's a large university. They can't keep track of all of that stuff, but they do pay attention to how many times students interact with their AIS portal after submitting their application. So I encourage my students to kind of build a routine of logging into their AIS, clicking around at least once a week after submitting their application. All right. The self-reported academic record. This is one of the most time-consuming, I think, elements of your A&M application. The self-reported academic record is essentially a self-generated digital transcript. This is how A&M is able to start reviewing applications in August before schools get back in session, because they don't need to wait for your high school to send your transcript to A&M. You are generating a transcript yourself and submitting it with your application. The self-reported academic record is a website that you make an account through, and you get your transcript out or all of your report cards from 9th through 11th grade, and you enter every class you've taken in high school and the grade you've gotten in every class in high school. You want to do it exactly as it appears on your transcript. I really encourage my students to take time to fill this out. Don't wait until the day you want to submit your Texas A&M application, because it's painstaking. It requires a lot of attention to detail, and it can take several hours to complete, especially if you've gone to more than one high school. In fact, I really recommend my students get started on this now if they can, while you have some free time over the summer. Once you complete your SRAR, you will link it to your Texas AIS portal. So make sure that once you set that portal up, you immediately link your SRAR to it. Otherwise, your A&M application will not be complete. Now, there are several universities that do use an SRAR. So if you're applying to, the University of Tennessee, for example, or Michigan State, those are one of the many schools that use an SRAR. And if you're struggling with this at all, A&M has compiled some wonderful resources on the website below that walk students through kind of all the tricky bits with filling out their SRAR. But in general, take your time with it, leave yourself adequate time, and make sure you are working from a copy of your transcript rather than from memory, because A&M will be confirming these grades against your official transcript once you enroll. And if there's a discrepancy, they're going to let you know about it.
Okay, we have really enjoyed spending some time with you this evening, and in just a moment we'll try to tackle any remaining questions. We've alluded to standardized testing several times on this webinar, and it persists as one of the most confusing parts of college admissions. So we have a webinar coming up in just under a month. In our follow-up note tomorrow, we'll share the link to register for this. This is a webinar we've done annually for the last 4 years, and it's among our most popular webinars, particularly because families, students, and parents end up looking for really guidance on these complex choices and a better understanding on how the landscape is changing in terms of standardized testing. I think this webinar may be the largest number of questions we've ever gotten on one webinar. And I know Julie and Delara are furiously trying to answer questions as we all look at this heartwarming picture of Miss Reveille, ma'am. Delara, Julie, are there any questions that remain that you think folks as a whole would benefit from hearing answers on?
Yeah, so there's a SRAR question, or SRAR, I call it the SRAR. So I know you talked about, actually, Delara, why don't you take this since you were just talking about it?
Sure. There are a couple questions asking when you fill out the SRAR. You can start that now if you want. You don't have to wait for the Common App to open on August 1st. You don't have to wait to submit your A&M application. It is completely separate from the Common Application. It is its own platform that links to your A&M portal. So you can get that started now.
And there is not a section to fill out the SRAR in the Common App. Unfortunately, the Common App has a courses and grades section, which is different from the SRAR. Sadly.
Any other remaining questions that you think the group as a whole would benefit from? I'll tackle one as we do one final review. There was a question asked about legacy, and boy, this is a complex answer. I think the general experience we've had is that A&M is as tight-knit a community as you would imagine. If you're an Aggie for life. You're not a former student. And so what I would say is that A&M would always love to have students who are third, fourth, fifth generation Aggies, but it probably won't be the reason that a student gets in. A&M wants great Aggies who can thrive on campus academically, socially, and exemplify the values of Texas A&M University. So there are a handful of colleges and universities in the United States who will say, yes, we factor legacy as one of the 1 or 2 most important criteria. And then there are increasingly a large number of universities who are saying, we will not factor it at all. But the honest answer is the majority of schools are right in between that. And that is, it is a consideration, but probably not the primary consideration for an admissions decision. Before we wrap up, Julie or Delara, any other questions that are still open that you think might be beneficial to share and answer with the group?
Well, we have one question about SAT score for May's business and honor program. So it's very specific to specific type of student.
At Texas A&M, like almost all universities in the public universities in the United States, will not break down admissions criteria on a college or major level. I think the easiest answer, frankly, is the more competitive the major, the higher the standards for academic rigor. Right? So as a general rule, and I think Delara alluded to this and Julie alluded to this, if you're targeting Mays, you probably ought to look to being in the top quartile of the test score distribution if you're going to submit test scores, because you want test scores that are every bit as strong as your academic profile. We have sure appreciated being on a Zoom with so many folks who dream of Aggie Land. We wish you great success. We hope that this webinar helps you thrive in this process and reduces your stress. As both Delara and Julie alluded to, when we work with students, Texas A&M University is among the first applications they submit. It's still a great application. That's the most important consideration. But Texas A&M University is not a school that says, hey, wait for Thanksgiving and then apply to us. They really are one of the sort of marquee schools in the United States that are rolling admissions. Thanks so much, and we wish everyone on this Zoom great success.